The November rain pounded against my apartment window, each drop like tiny fingers tapping out a frantic rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I paced across the worn linoleum of my kitchen, phone clutched so tightly in my palm that my knuckles had turned white. The ancient radiator in the corner hissed and clanked, filling the small space with metallic groans and insufficient warmth. In the bassinet by the sofa, Emma whimpered, her tiny face scrunched with hunger. The sound cut through me like a blade, sharper than the draft seeping through the cracked window frame. I glanced at the empty can of formula on the counter, turning it upside down as if somehow more might magically appear. Nothing. Just like my bank account. "It's okay, baby girl," I whispered, my voice breaking as I gently stroked her cheek. "Mommy's going to figure something out, but what options did I have? The rent was 2 weeks overdue. The electricity bill sat unopened on the counter, its red, final notice stamp visible through the thin paper. And now, no formula. The WIC appointment wasn't until next week, and my last paycheck from the diner had gone entirely to daycare so I could keep my shifts. 8 months of struggling, of pulling myself up just to be knocked down again. 8 months since I'd walked out of that mansion with nothing but a suitcase and my dignity. 8 months since I'd last seen him. My thumb hovered over his name in my contacts. I'd promised myself I would never call him, never give him the satisfaction. The memory of his eyes, dark and intense as thunderclouds, sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. Alexander Rossi, the man who'd swept into my life like a hurricane, destroying everything in his path only to rebuild it in his image. The man who still had no idea he had a daughter. Emma's cries grew louder, more insistent. My resolve crumbled like wet paper. I closed my eyes, pressed the call button, and held my breath. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Lena. His voice washed over me like dark honey, deep and smooth yet carrying an undercurrent of danger. Not a question, a statement, as if he'd been waiting for my call all these months. I gripped the counter's edge, steadying myself. "Alex," I managed, the familiar nickname slipping out before I could stop it. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. I could almost see him, sitting in his leather office chair, Italian suit perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders, one hand holding the phone while the other perhaps gripped a crystal tumbler of whiskey. The image was so vivid that for a moment, I forgot the squalor surrounding me. 8 months, 12 days, he said finally. Not that I've been counting. But he had been. Of course he had. Alex counted everything. Money, allies, enemies, slights both real and imagined. It had been both mesmerizing and terrifying to watch him calculate the world around him, positioning people like chess pieces. Emma's cries pierced the air again. I turned away from the phone, covering the receiver, but not quickly enough. "Is that a baby?" The sharpness in his voice made my stomach clench. I swallowed hard, searching for words. This wasn't how I'd planned to tell him. I'd never planned to tell him at all. Yes. Another silence, this one crackling with tension so thick I could feel it through the phone. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped an octave, soft in a way that I knew from experience was far more dangerous than his shouting. "Whose baby, Lena?" "Mine," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. I wiped them away angrily. I wouldn't cry. Not for him. Not again. "I see." 2 simple words that somehow contained multitudes. I heard him take a controlled breath, followed by the clink of ice against glass. "And the father?" I closed my eyes. "I need money for formula. I wouldn't ask if—" "The father, Lena." Each word precise, clipped. The veneer of civilization stretched thin over something primal. "She's yours," I said, the words falling from my lips like stones. "She's yours, Alex." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Emma seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, her cries subsiding to hiccuping whimpers. I could hear my own heartbeat, a frantic drumming in my ears. "My address hasn't changed," he said finally, his voice unnervingly calm. "Be here in an hour." "I can't just—" "1 hour, Lena, or I send someone to collect you. Your choice." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, a cold dread seeping into my bones. This was exactly what I'd feared. Give Alex an inch, and he'd take everything. But what choice did I have? Emma needed formula, we needed heat. And I was out of options. With trembling hands, I packed a diaper bag, wrapped Emma in her thickest blanket, and stepped out into the rain. The taxi driver gave me a suspicious look when I gave him the address. A shabby woman with a baby asking to go to one of the most exclusive addresses in the city, but the crisp 50 I handed him, my absolute last emergency cash, silenced any questions. As the car wound through progressively more affluent neighborhoods, my anxiety climbed higher. I hadn't been back to this part of the city since I'd left. The gleaming storefronts and immaculate sidewalks felt like they belonged to another world, one where I'd briefly lived as an imposter, before reality came crashing back. The taxi turned onto the private drive, a tunnel of perfectly manicured cypress trees leading to the estate. Even through the rain-streaked windows, the mansion was imposing, all stone and glass and old-world grandeur. "You sure this is the place, lady?" the driver asked, eyeing me in the rearview mirror. I nodded, not trusting my voice. As we pulled up to the circular driveway, I saw them. 2 black SUVs with tinted windows parked near the entrance, and standing under the portico, a familiar figure. Marco, Alex's driver and head of security, his massive frame unmistakable even from a distance. Beside him stood another guard I didn't recognize. The taxi hadn't even fully stopped when Marco stepped forward, opening my door with military precision. His eyes, always watchful, scanned me before landing on the bundle in my arms. Something unreadable flickered across his stoic face. "Ms. Winters," he said with a slight nod, the formality so at odds with the man who had once taught me how to make his grandmother's tiramisu during a weekend, when Alex was away on business. "Marco." I clutched Emma closer as the cold rain misted my face. "Let me," he said, holding out an umbrella and guiding me toward the house. The new guard took my meager bag from the taxi's trunk, examining it with subtle suspicion before following us. The entryway was exactly as I remembered. Soaring ceilings, marble floors, the massive crystal chandelier casting prismatic light across the foyer. The familiar scent of beeswax polish and the faint undertone of Alex's preferred sandalwood incense wrapped around me, triggering memories I'd spent months trying to suppress. "He's in his study," Marco said, nodding toward the east wing. "He asked that you go directly to him." Of course he did. No time to compose myself, to prepare for seeing him again. That was Alex, always ensuring he had the upper hand. I walked the familiar path, each step echoing in the cavernous hallway. Emma stirred against my chest, blinking up at the bright lights and ornate surroundings so different from our dingy apartment. The contrast made my cheeks burn with shame. What kind of mother was I, unable to provide even the basics for my child? The massive double doors to his study loomed ahead. I paused, drawing a shaky breath, and then knocked. A hesitant tap that seemed to disappear into the heavy wood. "Enter." His voice, even muffled by the door, sent a current of electricity down my spine. I pushed the door open, and there he was. Alexander Rossi hadn't changed in 8 months. If anything, he seemed more powerful, more present, a dark star pulling everything into his orbit. He stood by the windows, backlit by the storm outside, his tall frame outlined in flashes of lightning. The fine lines of his bespoke suit accentuated his broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist. His dark hair, always slightly too long, curled at his collar, but it was his eyes that held me captive, obsidian and fathomless, revealing nothing while seeing everything. His gaze moved from my face to the bundle in my arms, and something shifted in his expression, a micro-movement that anyone else might have missed, but that I had once been trained to detect in our time together. Surprise, uncertainty, and something deeper, more primal. "Lena," he said, my name in his mouth still holding the same power it always had. He moved toward us with that predatory grace that had first drawn me to him. The confident stride of a man who owned not just the ground he walked on, but everything his shadow touched. I instinctively stepped back. His advance halted immediately, a flash of what might have been hurt crossing his features before the mask slipped back into place. "You look tired," he observed, his eyes cataloging every detail. My faded jeans, The worn sweater with a small stain on the collar, the dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. "That's what happens when you have a 3-month-old, I replied, aiming for defiance but hearing the exhaustion in my own voice. 3 months. He calculated silently, his jaw tightening. "You were pregnant when you left. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes. And you didn't think I deserved to know?" I laughed, a brittle sound that startled Emma. Deserve? After what happened? A muscle ticked in his jaw. The only outward sign of the anger I knew was building beneath his controlled exterior. Before he could respond, Emma began to fuss, her tiny face scrunching as she let out a hungry cry. Something remarkable happened then. Alexander Rossi, the man feared throughout the city, whose name was whispered in corridors of power and darkened alleyways alike, faltered. His eyes widened, fixed on his daughter's face with an expression I'd never seen before. Vulnerability, wonder, fear. "She needs formula," I said, bouncing gently to soothe her. "That's why I called. I ran out, and I don't get paid until... Give her to me." His voice was soft but brooked no argument. "Alex, please, Lena." That word, please, so rarely used in his vocabulary that it stopped me cold. Reluctantly, I stepped forward, transferring Emma carefully into his waiting arms. His movements were tentative at first, but there was a natural grace to the way he cradled her, supporting her head with surprising gentleness. Emma's cries quieted as she stared up at this new face. For a heart-stopping moment, they regarded each other, father and daughter, with identical expressions of solemn assessment. Then Emma reached up, her tiny hand grasping at the platinum tie pin glinting at his collar. "She has your eyes," he murmured, a tremor in his voice I'd never heard before. "And your temper," I added before I could think better of it. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Almost. He looked up at me, and the intensity in his gaze pinned me in place. "You weren't going to tell me." "No," I admitted. "Why?" Such a simple question with such a complicated answer. How could I explain that I'd been terrified? Not of him, never of him directly, but of what his world would do to our child. How his enemies would see her as leverage. How his allies would see her as currency. How the life that had nearly destroyed me would surely taint her. "You know why, Alex?" Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Because of Viviana? I told you there was nothing. It wasn't just her." I crossed my arms, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. "It was everything. The raids, the meetings at midnight, the blood on your shirt that you thought I didn't see. I couldn't..." My voice caught. I couldn't raise a child in that world. He was silent for a long moment, looking down at Emma who had fallen asleep against his chest, her tiny hand still clutching his tie. When he spoke, his voice was deceptively soft. "So instead, you chose to raise my daughter in poverty, without proper food, without heat." His eyes met mine, hard as flint. "Without her father." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "I was trying to protect her. From me?" A dangerous edge crept into his voice. "From your life," I corrected quickly. "There's a difference." He moved to the leather sofa by the fireplace, sitting down with a fluid grace that somehow didn't disturb the sleeping infant. "You should have come to me." I remained standing, needing the distance. "Would you have let us go?" His silence was answer enough. The fire crackled in the grate, casting dancing shadows across his face as he studied our daughter. The possessive way he held her, one hand splayed protectively across her back, told me everything I needed to know. We weren't leaving. Not tonight. Possibly not ever. "You need formula," he said finally, looking up at me. "What else?" I swallowed my pride. "Heat. The apartment is clearly inadequate," he finished, his tone clipped. "You're staying here, Alex. Non-negotiable, Lena." The softness was gone, replaced by the implacable will I knew too well. My daughter will not spend another night in a cold apartment without proper nutrition or security. "She's my daughter too," I said, my hands curling into fists at my sides, "and yet, here you are, asking me for help." His words weren't cruel, merely factual, which somehow made them cut deeper. "I'm offering more than formula money. I'm offering her, and you, everything you need. with strings attached. Always. He didn't bother to deny it. That was one thing I'd always respected about Alex. His honesty about who and what he was. But those strings will keep her safe, fed, and warm. Can you say the same? I couldn't, and we both knew it. I sank into the armchair opposite him, suddenly too exhausted to stand. The weight of these past months, the sleepless nights, the endless worry, the grinding poverty, crashed over me like a wave. "What's her full name?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "Emma," I whispered. "Emma Grace Winters." I'd given her my maiden name, another decision he would see as a betrayal. "Emma," he repeated, testing the name. "It suits her." He looked up, his dark eyes holding mine. "But her name is Rossi Lena. That's non-negotiable as well." I didn't respond to his declaration about Emma's name. Some battles weren't worth fighting, at least not tonight, when exhaustion had settled into my bones like lead. Besides, I knew that look in Alex's eyes. The decision had been made. "You need to eat," he said, rising from the sofa with Emma still cradled against his chest. He pressed a button on the desk, and within seconds the door opened to reveal a young woman in a crisp uniform, not one I recognized from my time here. "Sir?" she asked, her eyes darting curiously between us. "Have the chef prepare a meal for Ms. Winters, and call Dr. Abernathy. I want him here within the hour." "A doctor?" I stood up too quickly, my head spinning slightly. "Emma isn't sick. She's just hungry." Alex's gaze swept over me, assessing. "The doctor isn't just for Emma." Before I could protest, he continued issuing orders. "Prepare the East Suite. Have Maria bring up the items on this list." He shifted Emma to one arm with practiced ease. Where had he learned to hold a baby? And scribbled something on a notepad. The woman nodded and disappeared with the efficiency of someone well-trained in anticipating Alexander Rossi's needs. I'd once been like that, attuned to his moods, his unspoken commands, his subtle shifts in demeanor that signaled satisfaction or displeasure. "I don't need a doctor," I said when we were alone again. "You've lost weight," he replied, those observant eyes missing nothing. "You're pale. Your hands are shaking." "I'm tired, not sick. Humor me." It wasn't a request. A knock at the door interrupted us. Marco entered, holding a small bottle of formula. "The staff keeps emergency supplies for Julia's baby when she visits," he explained, handing it to Alex. The mention of Julia, Alex's younger sister, was a reminder of the family I'd once been welcomed into. However, conditionally, I'd liked Julia, with her warm laugh and fierce loyalty. She'd been one of the few who'd treated me like a person rather than an acquisition. Alex tested the temperature of the formula on his wrist, another gesture so unexpectedly paternal it momentarily disarmed me. He hesitated, then held the bottle out to me. "She's your daughter," he said quietly. "You should feed her." I took both the bottle and Emma, settling back into the chair. As she drank hungrily, relief washed over me. Such a simple thing, being able to feed my child, and yet it had become a luxury I couldn't afford. "Thank you," I murmured, the words painful in my throat. Alex stood by the fireplace, watching us with an unreadable expression. In the flickering light, with his guard momentarily lowered, he looked younger than his 34 years, the sharp planes of his face, the shadow of stubble along his jaw, the intensity of his gaze. It all sent a traitor flutter through me that I immediately suppressed. "Why didn't you call sooner?" he asked. "You know why?" "Pride." He said the word like it was simultaneously a virtue and a fatal flaw. "Always your downfall, Lena," says the man whose pride fills entire rooms. A ghost of a smile touched his lips before vanishing. "The difference is, my pride builds empires. Yours leaves you and my child hungry and cold." The words stung because they contained a kernel of truth. I'd been so determined to make it on my own, to prove I could survive without him, that I'd pushed myself to the breaking point. Pride before the fall, wasn't that how the saying went? "I was doing fine until I lost my second job," I said defensively. "The diner cut back my hours and the daycare costs." "Stop." He held up a hand. "You don't need to justify yourself to me. Not anymore." That anymore hung between us, heavy with implication. There had been a time when I'd accounted for every minute of my day, every dollar I spent. every person I spoke to, not because he demanded it directly, but because failing to do so meant questions, suspicions, that cold distance that was worse than any confrontation. Emma finished her bottle, and I shifted her to my shoulder, patting her back gently. The familiar rhythm was soothing, as was the weight of her against me. "She looks like you," Alex said, his voice softer than before. "Around the mouth, the chin." "But she has your eyes," I replied, "and your expressions. Sometimes she looks at me like what? Like she's figuring out all my weaknesses." I meant it as a joke, but it fell flat in the heavy air between us. Another knock at the door heralded the arrival of the doctor, a silver-haired man with kind eyes and a perpetually concerned expression. I remembered him from before, the private physician who made house calls at all hours and asked no questions about certain injuries. "Mr. Rossi," he greeted, then turned to me with genuine warmth. "Ms. Winters, it's good to see you again." The examination was brief but thorough. Emma first, her weight, her reflexes, her lungs, her eyes. Dr. Abernathy pronounced her healthy but slightly underweight, recommending a specialized formula to help her catch up. The look Alex gave me at this news made me shrink into myself, though the doctor was quick to add that she showed no signs of neglect. When it was my turn, I protested again, but Alex's implacable stare silenced me. The diagnosis was predictable: exhaustion, mild malnutrition, anemia. The doctor wrote prescriptions for iron supplements and vitamins, his manner professional but tinged with concern. "Rest," he advised as he packed up his bag. "Proper nutrition. Minimize stress." He glanced at Alex, something unspoken passing between them. "I'll check in again next week." After he left, the silence stretched between us, broken only by Emma's soft breathing as she dozed in my arms. "You need to rest," Alex said finally, pressing the intercom on his desk. "Maria will show you to your room." "Our room?" I asked, suddenly panicked at the thought of being separated from Emma. His expression softened marginally. "The East Suite has a nursery adjoining the main bedroom. You'll both be comfortable there." An older woman appeared, Maria, the housekeeper who had been with Alex's family for decades. Her weathered face broke into a genuine smile when she saw me, and to my surprise, she enveloped me in a gentle hug. "Piccola," she murmured, the old nickname bringing unexpected tears to my eyes. "Little one. You've come home." Home. Was that what this place had been? The word conjured images both beautiful and painful, lazy. Sunday mornings in the garden solarium, Alex teaching me to play chess in the library. Candlelit dinners where he'd watch me with those intense eyes that made me feel simultaneously seen and hunted. But also, hushed phone calls that stopped when I entered rooms, unexplained absences, blood on shirt cuffs hastily hidden, the constant presence of armed men whose eyes followed my every move. "Just for tonight," I said, as much to myself as to Maria. "We're just staying tonight." The look that passed between Maria and Alex told me they both knew better, but neither contradicted me. Sometimes lies are necessary bandages for wounds not ready to be exposed. The East Suite was as I remembered it, elegant without being ostentatious, decorated in soothing blues and creams. The adjoining nursery, however, was new. Fresh paint, a beautiful white crib with delicate bedding, a rocking chair by the window overlooking the gardens. It had been prepared quickly, but with obvious care. "How did you—" I turned to Maria, gesturing at the nursery. "Mr. Rossi ordered it prepared months ago," she said simply. "After you left." The implications of that statement were too overwhelming to process. I focused instead on settling Emma into the crib, marveling at how tiny she looked in the expansive space. After months of sleeping beside me in our cramped apartment, would she sleep soundly here? Maria showed me where fresh clothes had been laid out. Silk pajamas that would have cost a month's rent at my apartment, toiletries in the marble bathroom, even a new toothbrush still in its packaging. The normality of it, the domesticity, was disorienting. "There's a baby monitor," Maria said, pointing to a sleek device on the nightstand. "And the security system, of course." She indicated a small panel by the door. "Mr. Rossi's quarters are connected through the security office. If Emma cries, he'll know." The thought of Alex monitoring my daughter's cries sent a complicated shiver through me. Protection or surveillance? With him, the line had always been blurred. "Thank you, Maria," I said, suddenly desperate to be alone. "I think we'll be fine now." She patted my cheek, her eyes knowing. "Rest, Piccola. Tomorrow is soon enough for difficult conversations." After she left, I stood in the center of the suite, feeling oddly untethered. The opulence surrounding me was so at odds with the life I'd been living that it felt almost obscene. I checked on Emma one more time before heading to the bathroom, stripping off my worn clothes with a mixture of relief and shame. The hot water of the shower was a luxury I hadn't experienced in months. In my apartment, the water heater worked sporadically at best, and I stayed under the spray until my skin turned pink. Clean, wrapped in a plush robe, I padded back to the bedroom to find Alex standing by the crib, watching Emma sleep. He'd removed his suit jacket and tie, and with his shirt sleeves rolled up to expose muscular forearms, he looked more human, more approachable. More like the man I'd fallen in love with before I understood the full reality of his world. "She's perfect," he said without looking up. "Absolutely perfect." "She is," I agreed, hanging back by the bathroom door, unsure of my place in this tableau. "You should have told me, Lena." His voice was quiet, but edged with something dangerous. "You should have told me I had a daughter." "Would it have made a difference?" I asked, equally quiet. "Would you have let us go?" Now he did look up, his dark eyes reflecting the soft glow of the nightlight. "You know the answer to that. Then you know why I left the way I did." He straightened, moving away from the crib with reluctance. "We have a lot to discuss. Tomorrow," I said, echoing Maria. "Please, Alex. I'm exhausted." For a moment, I thought he would insist. Alex Rossi was not a man accustomed to deferring conversations, especially important ones, but he surprised me. "Tomorrow," he agreed. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. "Lena." "Yes." "Don't try to leave during the night. The security system is active, and my men are on alert." His tone was conversational, as if he were commenting on the weather rather than issuing a thinly veiled threat. "For your protection, of course, of course." "Always for my protection, never my imprisonment. Good night, Alex." After he left, I moved to the window, drawing back the heavy curtains to peer out at the stormy night. Lightning flashed, illuminating the grounds with its stark light. In the distance, I could make out the silhouettes of men patrolling the perimeter, shadows moving with military precision through the rain, for my protection, for Emma's protection, or to ensure we remained exactly where Alex wanted us. I let the curtain fall back into place and checked on Emma once more, before climbing into the vast bed. The sheets were cool Egyptian cotton, the mattress perfectly supportive after months of sleeping on a lumpy futon. Every muscle in my body seemed to sigh with relief, yet despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. My mind raced with the implications of what I'd done. One phone call, that's all it had taken to pull us back into Alex's orbit. One moment of desperation, and now we were here, surrounded by luxury and danger in equal measure. Had I made a terrible mistake, or had I finally accepted an inevitable truth? In the darkest hour of the night, with rain lashing against the windows and my daughter sleeping peacefully in a crib that had been waiting for her for months, I faced the reality I'd been running from. Alexander Rossi would never let us go. Not now. Not ever. The question was no longer whether we would be part of his world, but how I would protect Emma within it. And deep in a corner of my heart I'd tried to silence. Another question whispered, could I protect her from him, if a part of me still remembered what it was to love him? Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through the curtains and the gentle sounds of Emma stirring in her crib. For a disorienting moment, I didn't recognize my surroundings, the high ceiling, the elegant furniture, the silky sheets tangled around my legs. Then memory flooded back, and with it, anxiety. I hurried to Emma, finding her awake and surprisingly content, her dark eyes taking in the unfamiliar room with the alert curiosity that never failed to amaze me. Had I ever been that observant, that engaged with the world, or had life already taught me to keep my head down when I was her age? "Good morning, sweet girl," I murmured, lifting her into my arms. "Did you sleep well in your fancy new bed?" She gurgled in response, one tiny hand reaching up to pat my cheek. The simple gesture unleashed a flood of love so intense it was almost painful. This was why I'd made the call. This was why I'd swallowed my pride and returned to the one place I'd sworn never to set foot in again. For her. Everything for her. A soft knock at the door interrupted our moment. Maria entered bearing a tray with breakfast and a fresh bottle for Emma. "Mr. Rossi asked me to bring this up," she said, setting the tray on a small table by the window. "He said to tell you he's in meetings this morning, but will expect you both for lunch at 1 o'clock in the garden room. Not an invitation, an expectation." Already, the subtle reminders of who held the power in this house were being established. "Thank you, Maria," I said, settling Emma in my lap to give her the bottle. Has he said anything else? About our staying here?" The older woman's eyes softened with sympathy. "It's not my place to speak of Mr. Rossi's plans, Piccola, but I can tell you he was up most of the night, making calls, giving orders." She hesitated, then added quietly, "He had your apartment cleared out." "Your things are being brought here." My stomach dropped. "He what?" "Your belongings, your clothes, everything." Maria busied herself straightening items on the tray, avoiding my gaze. "He said you shouldn't have to return to that place." The presumption stole my breath. Not even a discussion, not even the pretense of asking what I wanted. Just Alexander Rossi doing what Alexander Rossi did best. Taking control, eliminating options, creating facts on the ground that couldn't be undone. "I see," I managed, my voice tight. Maria paused at the door. "He means well, Lena, in his way." That was the problem, wasn't it? Alex's way of meaning well was indistinguishable from his way of asserting complete dominance. Love and control were so intertwined in his mind that I doubted even he could separate them anymore. After Maria left, I ate mechanically, the fresh fruit and warm pastries turning to ash in my mouth despite their quality. Each bite was a reminder of what I'd sacrificed by making that call. My independence, hard-won and precious, traded for security and comfort. For Emma's sake, I reminded myself. For Emma. I dressed in the clothes that had been provided, simple but expensive jeans, a cashmere sweater in a soft shade of blue, even new underwear with the tag still attached. Everything fit perfectly, which was both comforting and unsettling. Alex had remembered my size, or perhaps had someone check before ordering these items. Either way, it spoke to an attention to detail that had once made me feel cherished and now made me feel observed. The morning passed slowly. I explored the suite, finding a small sitting room I hadn't noticed the night before, stocked with books I'd once mentioned enjoying. The nursery had been equipped with everything Emma might need: diapers, wipes, creams, even toys appropriate for her age. The thoroughness was impressive and intimidating. It was as if Alex had been preparing for our return all along, confident that eventually I would come back to him. At noon, I began getting ready for lunch, more nervous than I wanted to admit. I'd spent our marriage learning to navigate Alex's moods, to anticipate his reactions, to present myself in ways that pleased rather than provoked him. Old habits resurfaced as I applied a touch of makeup, styled my hair, and dressed Emma in the sweetest of the outfits that had appeared in the nursery drawers. "We need to be smart about this," I told her as I fastened tiny buttons. "We need to figure out what he wants, what he expects." Emma kicked her legs, oblivious to the politics of our situation. "And then we need to decide what we're willing to give." At precisely 1 o'clock, I made my way down to the garden room, a solarium at the rear of the mansion filled with tropical plants and bathed in natural light. Alex was already there, seated at a glass table set for lunch, his attention focused on the tablet in his hands. He was dressed more casually than the previous night. Dark slacks and a charcoal sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. The sight of him sent an unwanted flutter through my stomach. He looked up as we entered, his eyes softening as they landed on Emma. With deliberate movements, he set aside the tablet, rose, and came to us. "You look rested," he said, his gaze moving from Emma to meet mine, "both of you." "It's amazing what a night in a warm room can do," I replied, aiming for lightness but hearing the edge in my own voice. If he noticed my tone, he chose to ignore it. "May I?" he asked, holding his arms out for Emma. I hesitated only briefly before transferring her to him. The ease with which he held her still surprised me. Emma regarded him solemnly for a moment before breaking into a gummy smile that transformed her serious little face. "She smiles now," he said softly, wonder evident in his voice. "When did that start?" "A few weeks ago." The milestone seemed so significant now, sharing it with him. "She's been doing it more and more." He returned her smile, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, I glimpsed the man I had fallen in love with. Not the powerful, dangerous figure who commanded fear and respect throughout the city, but the private Alex, who had once showed me his vulnerability in rare, precious moments. "Come," he said, gesturing toward the table. "You need to eat." Lunch was a masterpiece of subtle intimidation. Servers appeared and disappeared with silent efficiency. The food, a delicate risotto with wild mushrooms, my favorite, was impeccable. Crystal glasses filled with sparkling water caught the sunlight, throwing rainbows across the white tablecloth. And through it all, Alex kept Emma on his lap, feeding her a bottle with one hand while conducting our conversation with the calculated precision of a maestro. "Your things should arrive this afternoon," he said casually, as if informing me of the weather forecast. I set down my fork. "You had my apartment cleared out?" "Yes." Without asking me, he met my gaze directly. "Would you have agreed?" "That's not the point," I said, fighting to keep my voice even. "You had no right." "I had every right," he interrupted, his tone still conversational but with steel underneath. "That place was unsuitable for my child, for my wife." The word hung in the air between us. Wife, not ex-wife. Not Lena. Wife. "We're divorced, Alex," I reminded him gently. A smile touched his lips, cold as winter. "Are we?" My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about? The papers were finalized months ago. My lawyer confirmed." "Your lawyer," he said, emphasizing the word with subtle disdain, "was paid handsomely to tell you what you wanted to hear." I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "That's impossible. I have the decree. I signed." "You signed papers, yes." He took a sip of water, watching me over the rim of his glass. "But they were never filed with the court. Legally, Lena, you are still Mrs. Alexander Rossi." The room seemed to tilt around me. "You can't do that. It's illegal. It's fraudulent, manipulative, criminal." His smile widened fractionally. "All words that have been applied to my business dealings over the years. Did you really think I would let you go so easily?" "It was my choice," I whispered, hands trembling in my lap. "You made me believe." "I gave you the space you needed," he corrected, bouncing Emma gently when she fussed. "I let you think you were free while I waited for you to come to your senses." "Come to my senses?" Anger flared, hot and bright. "I left because I caught you with Viviana draped across your lap at that party. Because I found blood on your shirts and guns in our closet. Because men with cold eyes followed me everywhere I went. Because I was suffocating in this gilded cage you built." Emma, sensing my distress, began to cry. Alex stood immediately, his movements fluid despite the infant in his arms, and began pacing the length of the solarium, murmuring to her in soothing Italian. The tenderness of the gesture contrasted so sharply with the coldness of his revelations that I felt dizzy with cognitive dissonance. "First," he said, once Emma had quieted, his voice deadly soft, "Viviana was drunk and threw herself at me. I was removing her from my office when you walked in. A fact you would have known had you given me 30 seconds to explain, rather than storming out." I opened my mouth to protest, but he continued. "Second, yes. My business sometimes involves violence. I have never pretended otherwise. The blood, the guns, these are tools of my trade. Unpleasant but necessary." "Necessary for what?" I demanded. "Hurting people? Extortion? Murder?" His expression hardened. "Necessary for protecting what's mine. My family, my business, my territory." His eyes locked with mine. "You. I never asked for that kind of protection." "You didn't have to ask." He returned to the table, still holding Emma, who had fallen asleep against his chest. "It came with the ring you accepted." The diamond on my left hand had been gone for 8 months, yet I could still feel its phantom weight. 3 carats, flawless, set in platinum. a beautiful shackle that had marked me as Alexander Rossi's property. "You're saying I'm still legally your wife," I said, trying to focus on the immediate issue. "That the divorce was a fiction." "Yes." "And you think that gives you the right to move my things? To keep us here against my will? To make decisions about our lives without consulting me?" "I think," he said with deliberate patience, "that it gives me the responsibility to ensure my wife and daughter are safe, comfortable, and cared for." He paused, his gaze never leaving mine. "Something you made impossible when you disappeared in the middle of the night without a word. Guilt, unwanted, unwelcome, twisted in my chest. I had left without explanation, without confrontation. I'd taken the coward's way out, slipping away while he was on a business trip, leaving only a note that said I couldn't live this way anymore. I'd blocked his number, moved across the city, changed my email address. I'd done everything I could to erase Alexander Rossi from my life. And then I discovered I was carrying his child. I was scared, I admitted, the words difficult to push past the tightness in my throat. After what I thought I saw with Viviana, after finding those guns, I felt like I was living with a stranger, a dangerous one. Something flickered in his eyes, pain, perhaps, or regret. It was gone before I could be sure. "I would never hurt you, Lena. Never." The conviction in his voice was absolute. "Everything I've done, every decision I've made, has been to keep you safe." "Safe from what?" I challenged. "Other dangerous men like you?" His jaw tightened. "Yes." The simple admission stunned me into silence. I had expected denials, justifications, the usual dance of half-truths that had characterized so much of our marriage. Not this stark acknowledgement of the danger that surrounded him, surrounded us. "The world I operate in is not kind, not gentle," he continued, his voice low. "There are men who would not hesitate to use you against me, who would hurt you, hurt Emma, to get to me." His hand smoothed over our daughter's dark curls with infinite gentleness. "When you left, I let you go, because I thought perhaps you would be safer away from me, untraceable, unconnected. But you had me watched," I guessed, pieces falling into place. "You knew where I was all along." He didn't deny it. "At a distance. Just enough to know you were safe, until I wasn't." The realization was bitter on my tongue. Until I couldn't afford heat or formula, until I had to call you. Yes. No apology, no shame in the admission, just that unflinching honesty that had always been both his most admirable and most terrifying quality. "And now you're home, where you belong, where she belongs. Home." There was that word again, loaded with meaning and expectation. "What happens now, Alex?" I asked, suddenly exhausted by the chess game we were playing. "You keep us here? Lock us in your fortress? Pretend the past 8 months never happened?" He considered me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I want my family back, Lena. I want my wife and my daughter under my roof, where I can protect them, where I can provide for them." A muscle worked in his jaw. "Where I can love them." The word love from his lips sent a shock through me. Alexander Rossi did not speak of love easily or often. In our entire relationship, I could count on one hand the times he'd said the word directly. "Love isn't possession," I said softly. "It isn't control. In my world, they're one and the same." He shifted Emma to his shoulder, her tiny form dwarfed by his broad frame. "What I possess, I protect with my life. What I control, I ensure thrives. And what about what I want, what I need? Tell me." His dark eyes fixed on mine with unsettling intensity. "What do you want, Lena? What do you need? Name it, and it's yours." The offer hung in the air between us, tempting in its simplicity. What did I want? Security for Emma, a warm home, food on the table, freedom from the grinding anxiety of poverty, but also independence, agency, the right to make my own choices, even my own mistakes. Could I have both? Could there be a middle ground between the extremes of isolated struggle and gilded captivity? "I need time," I said finally. "Time to think, to adjust." I took a deep breath. "And I need you to listen to me, really listen, when I tell you what I'm comfortable with and what I'm not." He studied me for a long moment, calculation visible in his eyes. Alexander Rossi, negotiating terms, weighing concessions against gains. "A week," he said eventually. "Stay here, with Emma, for 1 week. Get your strength back. Let me get to know my daughter." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "At the end of that time, we'll talk again. And if you still want to leave," he paused, the words clearly difficult for him, "I won't stop you." Suspicion flared. "Just like that? You'll let us walk away?" "Not to that apartment," he amended swiftly. "Not to poverty and insecurity, but to a place of your choosing, with my financial support for Emma, with my protection, but from a distance." It was more than I had expected, less than I had hoped. A compromise from a man who rarely compromised. "And during this week?" I asked cautiously. "You'll have the run of the house and grounds, your old life back if you wish it. Or something new if you prefer." He shifted Emma in his arms. "All I ask is that you give me a chance to show you that things can be different. That we can be different. Could we? Was it possible to rewrite our story? To find a version where love didn't mean subjugation? Where protection didn't mean imprisonment?" 1 week. I agreed finally, knowing it was both a promise and a dangerous gamble. "But Alex..." "Yes?" "No manipulation, no games, no hidden agendas." I held his gaze, refusing to look away despite the intensity I found there. "If we're going to have any chance of finding a way forward, I need honesty. Complete honesty." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "You have my word. From any other man, perhaps it would have meant little, but Alexander Rossi's word, once given, was ironclad. It was the foundation upon which his empire was built, the reason allies trusted him and enemies feared him. If he said there would be honesty between us, then honesty there would be. Brutal, unvarnished, and absolute." "Then we have a deal," I said, extending my hand across the table in a business-like gesture. He looked at my offered hand with amusement, then captured it in his larger one. Instead of shaking it, however, he turned it over and pressed his lips to my inner wrist, where my pulse jumped traitorously at his touch. "A deal," he murmured against my skin, "and a new beginning." As he released my hand, his phone vibrated on the table. The spell broken, he checked the screen, his expression immediately shifting to one of cold efficiency. "I need to take this," he said, standing smoothly. He transferred Emma back to my arms with gentle care. "Business that can't wait." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The familiar pattern, closeness interrupted by the demands of his other life, was already reasserting itself. "We'll have dinner tonight," he said, already moving toward the door. 8 o'clock. "There's someone I want you to meet, someone who might help with our adjustment period." Before I could ask who, he was gone, leaving me with Emma in the sunlit solarium, surrounded by tropical plants and unanswered questions. The rest of the afternoon passed in a surreal haze. I explored the mansion with Emma, reacquainting myself with its labyrinthine corridors and hidden nooks. Some rooms were exactly as I remembered. The library with its leather-bound volumes and the faint scent of Alex's cigars. The formal dining room where I'd once hosted terrifying dinners with his business associates. The music room with the grand piano that collected dust because neither of us played. Other spaces had been transformed. The blue parlor, once a formal sitting room, had been converted into a cheerful playroom filled with toys and soft furnishings. A spare bedroom near our suite now housed a fully equipped nursery, more permanent and elaborate than the temporary setup in my suite. Even the garden had new additions, a small playground with infant swings and a sandbox, protected from the elements by a glass pavilion. All of it planned, built, and waiting. For how long? How soon after I'd left had Alex begun preparing for our return? A return he had clearly considered inevitable. My things arrived mid-afternoon, delivered by silent men in dark suits who stacked boxes in the dressing room adjacent to my suite. I was disturbed to find them neatly labeled in handwriting I didn't recognize. Winter clothes, books, mementos. Someone had been in my apartment before today, cataloging my possessions, perhaps even reporting back to Alex about my living conditions. The thought made my skin crawl, but also sparked a realization. If Alex had known how dire our situation had become, why had he waited for me to call? Why allow us to reach the point of desperation before stepping in? The answer came with uncomfortable clarity. Because he'd needed me to come to him, to ask for his help, to surrender the independence I'd fought so hard to maintain. My pride, as he'd pointed out, had been both shield and weakness. At 6 o'clock, Maria appeared with a garment bag. "Mr. Rossi asked that you wear this tonight," she said, hanging it on the closet door. "Of course, it's your choice." The gentle addition, "your choice," was new. In the past, Alex's requests about my appearance had been delivered without such qualifications. Another adjustment, perhaps, to our new dynamic. I waited until Maria left before unzipping the bag. Inside was a simple but elegant black dress, sleeveless, with a modest neckline and a skirt that would fall just below my knees. Tasteful, expensive, but not overly formal. The kind of dress that wouldn't look out of place at a business dinner. Accompanying it was a small velvet box. My heart stuttered as I opened it, expecting to find my old wedding ring, the one I'd left on his desk the night I fled. Instead, nestled on black velvet, was a delicate gold bracelet, fashioned like a slender vine with tiny leaves. Beautiful, but without the weight of symbolism a ring would carry, a peace offering, perhaps, or a first step in a longer campaign. At 7:30, I was dressed and ready, having fed and bathed Emma. The nursery adjoining my suite had been stocked with a baby monitor that connected to a small device I could carry with me. "Just for dinner," I told Emma, as I laid her in the crib, already drowsy from her bath. "I'll be back to check on you, and Maria will come if you cry." I stroked her downy hair, marveling as always at its softness. "We're going to figure this out, sweet girl. I promise." She blinked sleepily, those dark eyes, so like her father's, already drifting closed. I stood watching her for a long moment, gathering courage for whatever awaited me downstairs. The small dining room, not the formal one used for business entertaining, but the more intimate space where Alex and I had taken most of our meals together, was lit with candles when I arrived. Alex stood by the fireplace, talking quietly with a woman I didn't recognize. He looked up as I entered, his conversation faltering momentarily as his eyes swept over me. "Lena," he said, and something in his voice made heat rise to my cheeks. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," I replied, self-consciously touching the bracelet at my wrist. "For this, as well. It's lovely." His smile was brief, but genuine. "I'm glad you like it." He gestured to the woman beside him, an elegant blonde in her early 40s. "This is Dr. Catherine Reynolds, Kate, my wife, Lena." Wife, not ex-wife. The correction I might have made stuck in my throat as the woman extended her hand with a warm smile. "It's wonderful to meet you, Lena," she said, her handshake firm and professional. "Alex has told me so much about you." "Dr. Reynolds is a family therapist," Alex explained, moving to pull out my chair as a server appeared with the first course. "She works with people in our unique situation." Our unique situation. Such a delicate way of describing a marriage built on power imbalances, then fractured by mistrust and fear, now held together by a child and legal manipulation. "I specialize in helping couples navigate complex reconciliations," Dr. Reynolds elaborated once we were seated, "particularly in cases where there are significant external pressures." "You mean when one half of the couple is involved in organized crime?" The words slipped out before I could stop them, sharp with the edge of bitterness I'd been suppressing all day. To her credit, the therapist didn't flinch. "I work with people whose lives involve unique security concerns, yes. Politicians, high-profile business leaders, and yes, individuals whose businesses operate in gray areas of the law." Alex's expression had hardened at my outburst, but he remained silent, watching the interplay between us with calculated interest. "And Alex has hired you to, what? Convince me to stay? To accept this life again?" I picked up my wine glass, needing something to occupy my hands. "Actually, Dr. Reynolds said calmly, "Alex has hired me to help both of you communicate effectively about your needs and boundaries, to facilitate honest conversations about what a shared future might look like, if that's what you both want." I glanced at Alex, surprised. That's not usually your style, hiring someone to help with compromise. A muscle ticked in his jaw. I'm attempting to demonstrate that things can be different, Lena, that I am capable of change. The admission, vulnerable, almost humble, caught me off guard. Alexander Rossi did not acknowledge weaknesses, did not admit to needing improvement. The man I had married had been utterly confident in his rightness, his methods, his vision of our life together. Why now? I asked quietly. Why not before I left? Because I didn't understand what I stood to lose, he replied, his dark eyes holding mine. Not until you were gone. The raw honesty in his voice stole my breath. This was new territory for us. This direct acknowledgement of pain, of failure, of loss. Dr. Reynolds allowed the moment to stretch between us before gently redirecting. I understand you've agreed to stay for a week, Lena. I'd like to propose that during that time, we have daily sessions. Sometimes just you and me, sometimes including Alex, sometimes perhaps even with Emma present. To what end? I asked, still wary despite her soothing manner. To help you both determine what happens at the end of the week, she said simply. Whether that's a new beginning together or a more amicable, supportive separation. Alex's knuckles whitened around his wineglass at the word separation. But he said nothing. And you're truly impartial? I pressed. Given who's paying your fee, she smiled, unfazed by my skepticism. My professional ethics require my impartiality, regardless of who's paying. But more importantly, Alex has explicitly requested that I prioritize your welfare and Emma's in my recommendations, even if those don't align with his preferences. I looked to Alex, searching his face for confirmation. He nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. Whatever happens, Lena, I want it to be something you choose, not something you endure. The server returned with our main course, providing a brief respite from the intensity of the conversation. As we ate, Dr. Reynolds skillfully guided us toward lighter topics: my pregnancy, Emma's development, neutral memories from the early days of our relationship. The undercurrent of tension remained, but the acute discomfort of confrontation eased. By dessert, I found myself relaxing fractionally, even laughing at an anecdote the therapist shared about her own children. Alex watched me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Part satisfaction, part hunger, part something deeper and more complex. I should check on Emma, I said, as coffee was served, the weight of his gaze becoming too much to bear. Of course, he agreed immediately. We can continue this conversation tomorrow. Kate has suggested a first session at 10 if that works for you. The consideration, asking rather than dictating, was another small shift in our dynamic. I nodded, rising from my chair. 10 is fine. Good night, Dr. Reynolds. Thank you for your perspective. Please, call me Kate, she replied warmly. And Lena? Try to approach this week with an open mind. The past doesn't have to dictate the future. A lovely sentiment, I thought, as I climbed the stairs to my suite. But in my experience, the past was always present, always shaping what came next, especially with a man like Alexander Rossi. Emma was still sleeping peacefully when I looked in on her, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. I stood watching her, my heart so full of love and fear that it felt physically painful. What's the right choice? I whispered to her sleeping form. What keeps you safe, but also free? What gives you your father without binding you to his world? She slept on, oblivious to my turmoil, secure in the absolute certainty that her needs would be met, a certainty I had never been able to provide her on my own. A soft knock at the door interrupted my vigil. I opened it to find Alex standing in the hallway. His tie loosened, his expression guarded. May I come in? He asked, the formality at odds with the man who had once considered this entire house, including my body, his domain to command. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered, moving immediately to the crib to look down at Emma. The tenderness that transformed his face when he gazed at her was still startling to me. This softer, more vulnerable version of Alexander Rossi that I had never witnessed before. She looks peaceful, he said softly. She is, for now. I crossed my arms, maintaining distance between us. She's a good sleeper, thankfully. He turned to face me, his expression serious. I meant what I said at dinner, Lena. I want things to be different this time. Different how? I I challenged. You're still who you are, Alex. Your business is still what it is. The danger doesn't disappear just because you've hired a therapist. No, he agreed, but how we navigate that danger together can change. The boundaries between my work and our home can be clearer. Your autonomy can be respected. Can it? I raised an eyebrow. You manipulated our divorce, had me watched for months, and moved all my possessions without consulting me. Those aren't the actions of a man who respects autonomy. A flash of frustration crossed his face. I was protecting you, both of you. No, you were controlling us, I corrected. There's a difference. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. Then help me understand the difference. Help me learn where the line is. The request, vulnerable, almost pleading, was so unexpected that it momentarily silenced me. Alexander Rossi did not ask for help. He did not acknowledge gaps in his understanding. He certainly did not invite correction. That's not something I expected to hear from you, I admitted. 8 months without you and Emma has changed my perspective, he said quietly. 8 months, wondering if you were safe, if you were happy, if I would ever see you again. He took a step closer, still careful to maintain a respectful distance. I thought I knew what was best for you. I thought my way was the only way. I was wrong. The admission hung in the air between us, fragile and unprecedented. How do I know this isn't just another strategy? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. How do I know that once you have what you want, me and Emma here permanently, things won't revert to how they were before? You don't, he said with that brutal honesty I'd always found both admirable and frightening. You can't know. Neither can I. But I'm willing to do the work, Lena. Whatever it takes to earn back your trust, to build something better than what we had before. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movements, and took my hand. The touch, warm, familiar, electric, sent a shockwave through me. How long had it been since he had touched me with such gentleness, such uncertainty? One day at a time, he said, his thumb brushing over the bracelet at my wrist. That's all I'm asking. 1 week to show you what's possible. I should have pulled away. I should have maintained the boundaries I'd promised myself I would enforce. But standing there in the dim light of the nursery, with Emma sleeping peacefully beside us, and Alex looking at me with more vulnerability than I'd ever seen from him, I found myself nodding. 1 day at a time, I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. He lifted my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles that was both chaste and charged with meaning. Thank you, he murmured against my skin, for giving me, giving us, this chance. As he left, closing the door softly behind him, I sank into the rocking chair by the crib. My emotions a turbulent mix of hope, fear, and a treacherous longing for the man I had once loved with my whole heart. The man who might still exist beneath the hard exterior of the Mafia boss. The man who looked at our daughter with such tenderness that it made my chest ache. 1 week to decide our future. 1 week to determine if Alexander Rossi was capable of change, if I was capable of forgiveness, if we were capable of building something new from the ashes of what had burned between us. 1 week that already felt both too long and not nearly enough. The week unfolded in a strange rhythm of therapy sessions, careful conversations, and moments of unexpected connection. Each morning, Kate would arrive at 10, sometimes working with Alex and me together, sometimes seeing us separately. Her approach was direct but compassionate, creating a space where truths could be spoken without fear of explosive reactions. Tell me about the day you left, she said during our 3rd session. Alex and I seated at opposite ends of her couch in the small office she'd set up in one of the guest suites. I glanced at Alex, whose face had gone carefully blank, the expression he wore when bracing for impact. I'd been unhappy for months, I began slowly. The isolation, the restrictions on my movements, the constant sense of being watched. It was suffocating me. Did you tell Alex how you were feeling? Kate asked. I twisted the bracelet on my wrist, a nervous habit I'd developed over the past few days. I tried, in the beginning, but my concerns were always dismissed as necessary sacrifices for security. Not dismissed, Alex interjected, his voice tight. Explained. Explained in a way that made it clear my feelings were secondary to your system, I countered. Kate nodded thoughtfully. And the final catalyst? What made that particular day the day you had to leave? I took a deep breath. It was the party at the Bellini estate. I went looking for Alex and found him in Franco's private office with Viviana on his lap, her arms around his neck, his hand on her waist. Alex's jaw clenched. As I told you, she was drunk. She had been making a scene in the main hall, and Franco asked me to remove her before she embarrassed herself further. She could barely stand. When I tried to sit her down, she fell into my lap and was clinging to me to keep from sliding to the floor. But I didn't know that, I said, the old pain surfacing despite my efforts to remain calm. All I saw was a beautiful woman in my husband's arms. A woman who had been making it clear for months that she wanted you. You didn't give me a chance to explain, he said, frustration evident in his voice. You turned and left. By the time I extracted myself from Viviana and found you, you were already in the car, demanding that Marco take you home. And when we got home, I continued, the memory sharp as broken glass, I started packing. You tried to stop me. We argued. You said if I couldn't trust you, perhaps I needed a reminder of what you'd saved me from. Alex flinched as if I'd struck him. I was angry. Hurt that you would think I would betray you. I didn't mean... It doesn't matter what you meant, I interrupted. It matters what I heard, what I felt. I turned to Kate. He left that night for an emergency business meeting. When I went to put away the clothes I'd pulled out, I found guns in our closet, hidden in a compartment I never knew existed. And then I started looking and found more. Weapons, cash, fake passports. Evidence of a life I knew nothing about. You knew what I did for a living when you married me, Alex said, his voice low. I knew the sanitized version, I corrected, the businessman with some connections to the old country, some dealings in the gray areas of the law. Not, I gestured helplessly, not the arsenal in our bedroom, not the blood I'd seen on your shirts that you always explained away. Kate leaned forward slightly. So you left while he was gone, I nodded. I called a taxi at dawn, left my ring and a note, blocked his number, moved across the city to a neighborhood I knew his people didn't control, and discovered you were pregnant 2 weeks later. She prompted gently. Yes. I looked down at my hands. I considered contacting him then. But I was still so angry, so scared. And then as the pregnancy progressed, I convinced myself it was better this way. Safer for the baby to be away from his world. Until it wasn't safer anymore, Alex said quietly. Until you were cold and hungry and desperate. The truth of his words stung, but I didn't deny them. We had covered this ground before, in other sessions. The fear that had driven me away, the pride that had kept me from reaching out sooner. The reality that had finally forced my hand. Alex, Kate said, turning to him. What was going through your mind when you realized Lena had left? His eyes never left my face as he answered. Rage, at first, then fear. I had men searching the city within hours. His voice dropped. When we found where you'd gone, that tiny apartment in that neighborhood, I wanted to drag you home immediately. But you didn't, I said softly. This part of the story new to me. No. He exhaled slowly. I watched you from a distance. You seemed determined. Resolute. I told myself you needed time, space. That forcing you back would only make you hate me more. So you fabricated divorce papers to make me think I was free. A shadow crossed his face. A temporary solution. A way to give you the illusion of choice while keeping you legally protected. As my wife, you still had access to accounts you never touched, security you never saw, protection you never knew was there. And when I called about the formula, I'd been waiting, he admitted. Watching your situation deteriorate, hating every minute of it, but knowing you had to be the one to reach out, to choose to come back, even if just for help. It was manipulative, calculated, and yet, viewed through the lens of his particular moral code, almost understandable. Almost. Kate guided us through the rest of the session, helping us unpack the tangled web of assumptions, fears, and unspoken expectations that had characterized our marriage. By the end, I felt emotionally drained, but also strangely lighter, as if the act of speaking these truths had released some of their power to hurt. As the week progressed, I observed Alex with new eyes. He was still Alex, commanding, intense, unyielding in certain matters, but there were subtle shifts in his behavior that I couldn't ignore. He asked before entering my suite, never assuming access. He consulted me about meals, activities, even the smallest decisions regarding Emma. When business called, he explained where he would be and when he would return, without revealing details that might endanger me with knowledge. Most surprisingly, he listened. Really listened, without interruption or dismissal, when I expressed concerns or boundaries. The Alex I had married would have seen such expressions as challenges to his authority. This Alex seemed to recognize them as necessary guideposts for our new relationship, whatever that might become. Emma bloomed under his attention. She was too young to understand the complexities swirling around her, but she responded to his deep voice, his gentle hands, his unwavering focus when he held her. The first time she fell asleep on his chest, I saw tears in his eyes, quickly blinked away, but undeniable. "She trusts me," he said wonderingly, his large hand cradling her tiny head. "How can she trust me when she barely knows me?" "Because you're her father," I said simply. "That connection exists whether you've been present or not." He looked up at me, vulnerability naked on his face. "I've missed so much already, her birth, her first smile. I don't want to miss any more, Lena." The rawness of his emotion caught me off guard. This was the Alex I had glimpsed in rare, precious moments during our courtship, the man beneath the armor, capable of feeling as deeply as he calculated coldly. By the 5th day, Kate suggested we discuss practical arrangements for the future. "If you stay," she said to me, "what would need to be different to make you feel secure and respected?" I had given this considerable thought over the sleepless nights of the past week. "Clear separation between business and home," I began. "No weapons in our living spaces, no business meetings in the house, no discussions of operations, where I might overhear." Alex nodded, his expression serious. "Reasonable. I can maintain offices downtown for those purposes. Freedom of movement," I continued. "No more guards following me everywhere. No more having to account for every minute away from the house." This one made him tense visibly. "That's a security risk I'm not comfortable with, especially with Emma." "I understand the need for security," I acknowledged, "but there has to be a middle ground between being a prisoner and being unprotected." "What if," Kate suggested, "you had a designated security team that maintained a respectful distance, present but not intrusive, and perhaps a check-in protocol that feels less like surveillance and more like mutual reassurance?" Alex considered this. "I could work with that arrangement. And I need my own money," I added. "Not an allowance, not access to your accounts, my own income, from my own work." This clearly surprised him. "You want to work? Even with Emma?" "Not immediately," I clarified. "But eventually, yes. I was halfway through my degree in early childhood education when we met. I'd like to finish it. Maybe teach or work in program development." He was quiet for a long moment, and I braced for objection. The Alex I had married would have dismissed such aspirations as unnecessary, perhaps even inappropriate for his wife. "If that's what you want," he said finally, "I'll support it. Financially, logistically, however you need." The lack of resistance was so unexpected that I momentarily lost my train of thought. "And if I decide to leave?" I asked, forcing myself to address the other possibility. "What then?" His jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Then we establish a co-parenting arrangement that prioritizes Emma's well-being. You would have a home of my choosing for security reasons and financial support, regular visitation schedules, joint decision-making regarding her upbringing. And us?" I pressed. "Would you file the real divorce papers this time?" Pain flashed across his features. "If that's what you want," he said quietly. "Yes." It was the answer I needed to hear, the promise of true choice rather than illusion. Yet it left me with a hollow feeling I hadn't expected. On our final night before the week's deadline, after Emma had been put to bed, Alex asked me to join him on the terrace. The evening was mild, stars scattered across the sky above the carefully manicured gardens. He had set a small table with wine and a light supper, candles flickering in the gentle breeze. "No pressure," he said as I hesitated in the doorway. "Just dinner. Our last night before you decide." I joined him, accepting the glass of wine he offered. For several minutes we ate in companionable silence, the tension between us somehow both acute and comfortable, a familiar discomfort we had learned to navigate. "Do you remember our first date?" he asked suddenly. The memory brought an involuntary smile. "The art gallery opening. You spent the entire evening ignoring the exhibits and watching me instead. You were more interesting than any painting," he said, his eyes warm in the candlelight. "The way you moved through the crowd, cautious but curious, the way you actually looked at the art instead of just pretending to appreciate it like everyone else." "I was so nervous," I admitted. "You were this imposing figure everyone seemed to defer to, and I was just a scholarship student working part-time as a caterer." "You were never just anything, Lena." He leaned forward slightly, the flame catching the angles of his face. "That's what drew me to you from the first moment. Your quiet strength, your determination to make your own way despite the obstacles life had thrown at you. The irony wasn't lost on me, and then I became another obstacle to overcome." He didn't deny it. "I wanted to give you everything, to protect you from ever experiencing hardship again, but in doing so, I took away the very independence I admired." He shook his head. "I thought I was building you a palace. Instead, I created a cage. It was a beautiful cage," I said softly, "but still a cage. And now?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "What would it be now if you stayed?" I considered the question seriously, weighing the week's revelations against the years of history between us. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "That's what we'd have to discover together." He nodded, accepting the uncertainty of my response without pushing for more. Another change. The old Alex would have demanded a decision, a commitment, a clear path forward. "Whatever you decide tomorrow," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand, "know this. You and Emma are my heart, my family. Whether you're under my roof or across the city, that will never change." The simple declaration, free of manipulation or pressure, touched something deep within me. This was the Alex I had fallen in love with. Direct, passionate, capable of a devotion so intense it was almost frightening in its totality. "I need to ask you something," I said, my heart pounding. "Something important. Anything. The blood on your shirts, the guns, the midnight meetings." I took a deep breath. "If I stay, if we try again, I need to know. Will there ever be a time when those things aren't part of our lives? When your business is legitimate enough that we don't live with that shadow?" It was the question that lay at the heart of everything, the one I'd been afraid to ask directly because I feared his answer. Alex was silent for a long moment, his expression grave. "I've been working toward that goal for years," he said finally, "moving investments into legitimate enterprises, distancing myself from the more problematic aspects of the family business." "But?" I prompted, hearing the unspoken qualifier. "But it's complicated. There are obligations, alliances, expectations from the old guard." He met my gaze directly. "I can promise you this. Within 5 years, my primary income will be from legitimate sources. Within 10, I'll be removed enough from the other elements that they won't touch our daily lives. Emma will grow up knowing me as a businessman, not—" He trailed off. "Not a mafia boss," I finished for him. He flinched slightly at the blunt terminology but didn't contradict me. "Yes, and in the meantime?" "In the meantime, I maintain the separation we discussed. Home remains untouched by that world. You and Emma remain protected but not confined. And I continue the transition as quickly as is safely possible." It wasn't a perfect answer. It wasn't even the answer I had hoped for in my most optimistic moments. But it was honest. Brutally, completely honest. And rooted in the reality of who Alexander Rossi was, rather than who I might wish him to be. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for the truth." He squeezed my hand gently. "Always, from now on, even when it's difficult, even when it's not what you want to hear. That's my promise to you, Lena. We finished our dinner, talking of lighter things, Emma's development, plans for the garden, memories that didn't carry the weight of our more troubled history. When we parted for the night at my door, he kissed my cheek with a restraint that spoke volumes about his commitment to respecting my boundaries. "Until tomorrow," he said, his dark eyes holding mine for a moment before he turned and walked away. I slept fitfully, my mind churning with the decision before me. By morning, as I fed Emma and watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I knew what I had to do. Alex was waiting in the garden, as we had arranged. He stood as I approached, his posture tense despite his attempt at casual confidence. Emma was in my arms, contentedly gumming her fist, and watching the world with those solemn dark eyes so like her father's. "Good morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Did you sleep well?" "Not really," I admitted, sitting on the bench beside him. "Too much thinking." He nodded, understanding. "And have you reached a decision?" I looked down at Emma, then out at the garden where spring flowers were beginning to bloom, then finally at the man beside me. The man I had loved, fled from, feared, and perhaps could love again in a different, more equal way. "I have," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I want to try, Alex, not to recreate what we had before, but to build something new, something better for all of us." The relief that washed over his features was so profound that for a moment I thought he might weep. Instead, he reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and placed his hand over mine, where it rested on Emma's back. "Thank you," he said simply, those two words carrying the weight of promises made and broken and made again. "It won't be easy," I cautioned. "There will be days when I question this decision, days when old patterns try to reassert themselves, days when your world intrudes despite our best efforts." "I know," he agreed, "and there will be days when my instinct to control, to protect at all costs, will clash with your need for freedom, days when my past complicates our present. But there will also be good days," I said, allowing hope to color my voice. "Days when we're just a family, when Emma has both her parents, when we remember why we fell in love in the first place. Those days will outnumber the difficult ones," he said with quiet conviction. "I'll make sure of it." Emma chose that moment to drop her fist and reach toward her father, a gummy smile breaking across her face. Alex took her carefully from my arms, his expression transforming with that now familiar tenderness. "Papa's here, Piccola," he murmured, the Italian endearment flowing naturally. "Papa's not going anywhere." As I watched them together, my daughter and her father, bound by blood and now by choice as well, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. This decision wasn't without risk. There were no guarantees that Alex could change enough, that I could trust enough, that we could find that elusive middle ground between his world and mine. But in that moment, with morning sunlight spilling over the three of us in the garden he had built for the family he had always wanted, I allowed myself to believe in the possibility of our future, not a perfect one, not a fairy tale, but a real one, complicated and challenging and ultimately ours to shape together. "Welcome home, Lena," Alex said softly, his free arm encircling my shoulders as Emma babbled happily between us. And for the first time in 8 months, perhaps for the first time ever, that word felt true, not because of the mansion's luxury or the security it represented, but because home, I was finally beginning to understand, wasn't a place at all. It was the three of us finding our way forward together, one day at a time.